Alright you guys, welcome to the first iteration of the Food Forest Morning Show, where I basically call people and we have a conversation about their food forest and see if I can be helpful in any way at all. So, we've got somebody to call this morning. I believe his name is David, and we'll just jump into it. I'll put them on speakerphone, we'll have a conversation, we'll see how long it lasts, and basically I'm going to ask questions to see how useful can I be.
Morning, guys.
Good morning, David. How we doing?
Good, how are you?
Yeah, good, man. I'm just filming this, so I'm looking forward to seeing what we can have a conversation around with your food forest ideas.
Yeah, man. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So part of why I give you a call, man, is because you seem to have a context that I think a lot of people are going to find quite similar to their own. Do you want to explain a little bit about what you're kind of working with?
Yeah, sure. So, based in Auckland, which I think probably a lot of your other followers are.
Yeah.
We've got a bit of space here to use, but just not really sure where to start. Obviously, you do a bit of research online and things, and can get a little bit confusing. So I think it'd be really good to be able to start with just maybe like a bit of a generic design that's likely to work for a lot of people in Auckland.
Yeah, I love that, David. You said the favorite catchphrase of new clients of mine. It's, I don't know where to start.
Yeah.
It's interesting, man. What is it that you've come across that, because obviously you have a degree of information, you said you've kind of done a little bit of research. What's that thing that's kind of keeping you from starting? Because you've got to have some level of awareness around certain fruit trees and some ideas. What is it that's like that biggest barrier for you to keeping you from actually getting things happening?
Yeah, sure. I mean, a few things probably. Firstly, it'd be a bit of analysis paralysis. You do all this research and you're like, okay, I should start something, but you're just not really sure exactly where. And then also off the back of that, it's like myself and a lot of other people probably only have like an ideal little spot that they want to use, and they don't want to put the wrong things in the ground and then regret it later. Ideally, only having to do it once and do it right. And then I think I also mentioned in my DMs there, just understanding the different stages of the food forest, because understandably parts of it are meant to die out at a certain point to give way to the bigger trees and all this sort of thing. So from that perspective, just knowing the appropriate spacings and all that sort of thing. Because in my mind I'm thinking, all right, just chucking whatever I want in the ground in a bit of a row with some Titonia in between them or something like this, which would probably be alright, but it just seems like a bit of a shoot from the hip approach as opposed to actually planning it out and doing it properly.
Yeah, you're not far off. There's a few things that we'll cover and kind of adjust there. The first thing is that, so analysis by paralysis. You're absolutely right about that, man. So many people, myself included, I spent like the first year just doing tons of research and not doing a whole lot of like in the ground planting until I kind of realized that that's where actually most of the learning happens. You can read online, you can watch all the videos you want, but most of the learning is going to happen when you're doing stuff on your own site and you're making your own observations, because everybody's site's different. Everybody's going to have different things react differently to even compared to like in the same region or what you see online here in New Zealand. So that's, and you mentioned in the messages that you have about a hectare of space that you're kind of playing with hay.
Yeah. So, like we've got a lifestyle block here, like on the north side of Auckland, so we've got plenty of space to play with. It's like a weird strip of land that's kind of thin and very long with a few rolling hills and stuff like this. So there's a lot of usable space, but a lot of it's quite far from where our houses and things, so like there's a perfect little paddock right in the middle that's not too far from the house that I want to start with, and then we can just sort of let it expand from there. So it's quite good having that freedom to let it grow as time goes on. But initially anyway, I just want to get started and figure out what to chuck in the ground and if there's any prep work I need to be doing or just all those types of things.
Yeah, cool. Well, that's great that you've got quite a bit of space to play with. And because that kind of defeats the idea that, I don't want to make any mistakes, because A, they're going to happen and it's part of the learning process, but it also gives you a lot of space to continually like make iterative improvements. That's been one of the biggest learnings for me here, is that even small systems, you watch them for a few months, cool, you can make the next system, even if it's just a couple months later, that much better, just by observing, managing, and thinking, oh, I could have done this a little bit differently. The first example is what you said before of putting Mexican sunflower in the actual rows. I've moved away from that, and it doesn't take very long to kind of figure out why, is because the management level goes way up when you put them directly in line with your other trees. Whereas if you offset your Mexican sunflower, you can allow it to grow a little bit bigger. You don't need to be as much as managing it as frequently. And so that's one of the key things that I would have picked up, is if I'm putting Mexican sunflower directly in the tree line, a few months later, cool, I'm not doing that again.
Okay, all right.
In terms of, you mentioned you have a hectare of land, but a lot of it's actually quite usable, which is really awesome, as opposed to like having really steep land, or a lot of people aren't quite so blessed. So that's really fantastic. And you mentioned that it's quite long, which is similar to our property here. Is like the house site is located kind of on one end, and then it's like kind of long in direction in the other, which gives you a really cool opportunity for, I don't know how familiar you are with permaculture zones. Is that something you've heard of before?
Yeah, like I've read about it and things. That's like just having the most the stuff you use the most closest to the house and all that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it makes that really clear. Some properties aren't quite as clear because it's not always like directly in a outward, like a target shape with the zone 1 right in the middle, and then it kind of moves outwards. Because it kind of depends on frequency of use and frequency of like access in areas. But having that long property, you kind of have a good idea of, cool, I should plant like the really big nut trees a lot further away down that far end of the property, and then like the berries and salad greens and other fruit trees kind of closer to home.
All right, okay.
And you mentioned starting in that first paddock that's kind of closest to the house side, is that right?
Yeah, well, like with so the house is at one end, and I mean we're gonna chuck a few little garden beds like right on the back porch, basically.
Yeah.
Where we'll have all of our like the garden greens and things that you mentioned there.
Yep.
And then sort of just back from the house one just seems absolutely perfect. It's facing kind of towards the north. I'm assuming that's the direction that it should be sort of pointed towards. And it's on a bit of a slope going down the hill, and the slope's facing towards the north. So I think it'd be an ideal little spot there. It's like sun all day long and things. So.
Man, that is pretty ideal. Gentle slope, good access, semi-north facing, close to the house. Man, you've got it perfect, man. You're made.
That's great. Cool. That's good.
So you're familiar with, because there's slope there, you're familiar with what it kind of means to work on contour, hey?
No. What would that, what's that mean?
Okay, so you
just having like terraces?
not necessarily terraces. Basically, it's sometimes it looks like terraces, but other times it doesn't. So working on contour, you probably understand what contour is. Basically, the level, like the perfectly level lines across a landscape. So you've seen contour maps before? Yeah. So basically what that means is that for a number of reasons, one of them is because it makes for easy access. So, say you're going out to harvest or you're using a wheelbarrow, you're not kind of having to push uphill or slow things down going downhill. Everything, all your access paths should be pretty much on level, so you're walking kind of just across the slope rather than up or down. So access is one of the reasons that working on contour is quite important. But the second reason, and probably more important than that, from an ecological and like a quality food forest perspective, is working on contour helps. It keeps all your organic material, it gives it a place to sit neatly, so it doesn't keep rolling downhill, but it also helps the water infiltrate a lot better. Because things are on contour, it's capturing a lot of that material, it's seeping in. Did you mention if you've got, is it clay soil or is it more sandy, kind of like a loam, free draining?
Well, the land we've got here was used as just like a dairy farm for probably 50 years. And I don't know a heck of a lot about gardening, but anyone who does that has been here reckons our soil's really bloody good. Someone has mentioned that it's kind of sandy, but it's just beautiful, like nice thick brown, and it goes quite far down before the clay starts to. So it's,
Man, that's
pretty good apparently.
You hit the lottery, didn't you?
Yeah, I think it's pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, and that's great that you've got a good thick amount of like really rich topsoil and then clay, because one of the things that we're facing here is that we've got really free draining soil, but there's no clay underneath. And so having clay is kind of something that can help retain moisture in the ground when it is a bit more dry. It doesn't just drain right through. Like we're on pumice, and so water just drains, nutrients just drain. So having that layer of clay can really help retain a lot of that moisture and that nutrient.
We've actually got a little bigger excavator as well, so we could accentuate the contour of the land a little bit more. But I'm just a bit worried that might like warp the soil or do something bad. Like if I dig too deep, it'll be down to the clay, and we'd have to fix it or something. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, part of it is if the digger is necessary, which who knows if it is or not at this stage. There are sites that we have, we've done work with diggers, and one of the key things is making sure you're staying on contour. I've seen projects kind of start to go south when you start dipping down like below grade, and then you create water and erosion issues. So if you're doing the digger work, you do want to be careful that you're staying on contour. You want to kind of map it out early, whether with spray or with flags or whatever you need to do. Maybe use an A level. Have you seen an A frame level before? Yeah, so it's a really easy, simple. You can just Google it, A frame level. It's a really easy way of kind of finding the contour of the land yourself. You can stick flags in. You can like mark them however you want. But it's a really easy way of kind of DIY figuring out the contour of the land to prep for any digger work. One of the things to be paying attention to that kind of addresses what you were asking about, though, is like turning the soil and mixing soil levels and getting down to the clay. And this isn't me, but skilled digger operators will do their best to keep the topsoil separate from, so essentially what they're doing is they're making the most of the topsoil that you have, right? So they're not like inverting layers, so they're not like burying your topsoil and putting the clay back on top. If you are using a digger, I think that the thing would be, A is for getting flat access, so that'd be a case of them being terraces, right? If you're not using a digger, you can just do it. You can kind of just plant on contour. You can make a slight terrace by hand, but at a certain scale, it becomes easier. And for getting flat access, like for wheelbarrows or whatever, it becomes easier with a digger. And so the thing there is, if you're doing that, then it would make sense. What we did in previous project is, you kind of do need to take some time and identify, cool, this is my access track, this is maybe a support row, another access track, and then you have a fruit tree line. On your fruit tree lines, what you can do is you can dig a bit of a trench, and you can fill that. If you have access to, you said it's a lifestyle block, and so you've probably got access, or you've got friends who have horses or cows.
Yeah.
So well, you've probably got friends who've got, basically you can get access to aged manure.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Yeah.
So that's something that I've just seen really makes these systems, especially when you're first planting them, they just explode. So what we've done in the past is make trenches with the digger where your tree lines are going to go, your fruit tree lines. You fill that in with aged manure, you seal it up, and then that's where you plant your fruit trees. And obviously you've got your support rows, your access in between. So it takes some mapping and some figuring out beforehand. But that's kind of addressing the amendment question. When you're first getting started, do I put any amendments in? Aged manure is a fantastic one.
Okay, alright. Great suggestion, okay.
So,
and, so, like, with regards to how a system ages over time, is it as simple as sort of figuring out the total diameter of the mature trees in the future, and sort of just planning around that so that whatever you plant within that radius is just going to be okay to die off after a certain point, or are there sort of various stages that the food forest will go through, or is it just sort of like an early stage and then a later stage, and that's kind of it?
Yeah, to be honest, it really depends on kind of how freeform you want to be with it, right? Because in some contexts, some people, they're doing it commercially, they want to have everything very planned out, and they're doing it in a way where maybe, for example, they're buying a lot of grafted fruit trees, and they're not doing many things from seed, right? Those are instances where you want to be a little bit more careful because you're spending a lot more money on grafted trees. You want to be a little bit more planful about the spacing intervals and whatnot. Whereas if you're doing everything from seed, which is really going to reduce your costs, it's also going to potentially extend the amount of time that it takes to get certain fruit from these trees. But it essentially, you get to a point where if you can do things by seed, then it really doesn't matter, because seeds are really abundant. They're generally pretty cheap, and you overplant, right? So you plant way more than you know you're going to have in 10, 15 years. So that's kind of addressing the spacing and the density issue, because you can plant big nut trees really densely, and then over the course of 2-3 years, maybe you'll have pruned 70% of them out, right? Maybe the only 30% that you leave are the ones that grow really quickly, or maybe you notice some start to flower and produce like really soon out the gate, and that's going to be good genetics, so you want to keep those around. So if you're doing things from seed, you can go really, really dense. If you're buying grafted trees, it does pay to like be a little bit more planful and thoughtful about what kind of spacing you're doing. And to answer the first part of your question about the stages that a food forest will go through, again, that really depends on the context, because you can make these systems as complex as you want to. Really, you can plant things in a way, and you can plant such a diversity that there's so many different layers and different species that are going to kind of come online at different intervals, that it's just a constant flow of new things coming on. Some things are flowering. Or you can make a really simple system, and it's still a food forest, it's still an agroforestry system, but it's just it's pared back.
Okay.
Because an easy way of thinking about it is that there's what I would consider kind of three main stages in a food forest. And obviously nothing fits in perfect boxes, but this is a really easy, simple way of thinking about it. There's the placenta stage, which comes first. Essentially, that's the stage that that plant community is going to kickstart the whole thing, right? So in a lot of cases, we use annuals in that stage. So really quick producing things, and this depends on what time of year it is that you're planting this, because obviously you can't plant traditional summer vegetables in the middle of winter or at the end of summer. So it kind of depends on when you're installing these systems, but that's kind of part of why I like to install them in spring, is because you get to include a huge assortment of like summer vegetables as your placenta, but also installing these at the beginning of spring gives the longest growing season for that first year for things to really get established. So placentas first, it kind of has that like first kickoff, and that's kind of the plant community that like is that first succession. You're harvesting things right away, 30 days, 2 months, 3 months, squash, all that, like everything. The secondary stage is kind of the next kind of when it starts becoming a little bit more like a young forest, right? And this is when you're going to see a higher emergence of those support species. So you're going to see a lot more Mexican sunflower presence. You're probably going to see a lot more of those support tree presence as well. So whether it's the nitrogen fixing ones like the acacia or the tree lucerne, maybe some alder, or maybe you'll start seeing some eucalypts, whatever support trees that you kind of identified as ones for your situation, that's going to be a lot of what you'll see in the support realm. And then those early producing, like those early perennial species as well, like things like tamarillo, guava, for example. Just those really fast-growing, fast-producing. Banana is another example. So things that are going to kind of be productive in, from that second year, second year, into year 3, 4, 5, right? Then after that stage, so that also includes perennial vegetables. You can have globe artichokes, you can have rhubarb, fast-producing trees like mulberries. But then that third kind of stage would kind of be called a climax, right? Climax scenario is where you have those really long-lived fruit trees. So say you're planting a lot of avocados by seed, right? That's when those are emergent. That's kind of what stage you're at. Is when those are more mature, those begin fruiting. The cherimoya, same kind of thing. Those really late stage species, maybe some big nut trees. So that's a really easy way of thinking about it in 3 distinct stages. And if you can kind of tick those off in terms of, cool, do I have a placenta stage? Do I have at least some fast-producing annuals? Next stage, okay, cool. Do I have some quick-producing things like the guavas, tamarillos, bananas, etc., pineapples maybe? And then your really long-lived stuff. Once you kind of cover those bases, then you can kind of start diving into the details and nitty-gritty of things like stratification, what things can occupy the low light levels in the medium term and the long term, what different canopy layers are there going to be. But that's kind of like the next level of thought beyond what life cycle are they.
Wow, okay, interesting.
Yeah. So does that give you an idea of kind of maybe some things to begin thinking about in terms of, cool, for the landscape side of things, you can kind of start looking at what contours are and what access paths might want to be, and maybe you could fit a support row here, a tree crop row here.
Yeah, definitely. It's been super helpful. I think from here I just need to go and walk around in my paddock for a few hours and start dreaming up some ideas. And then, yeah, later on down the track I might just contact you and yeah, just get some more advice around the actual mapping of things. I see you do a bit of consultancy or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I would also recommend, David, is I've got some webinars coming up, which I'm basically going to dive even more into detail for all these things that we've just covered. And so those are going to be online. They're cheap. They're probably, I think they range between $17 and $27. So I definitely recommend coming to one or two of those webinars. Those are going to be really valuable. And yeah, and then whenever you're ready, give me a shout. I'll come up to Auckland, give you a hand.
Thank you, mate. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for the call, David.
Nice one, mate.
All right.
Cheers. Thank you.
Take care.
See ya.
That was awesome. That was really cool. I'm enjoying this. I think I'm going to keep doing this because that was really, really fun. Hopefully there was some valuable stuff in there for you guys as well. There probably was. If you knew all of that already, man, come join me. Come join my team of just me and help me out with some stuff because we need more people doing this. Really. Yeah. Hope that was interesting. Hope that was valuable. We'll probably do this again. I want to try and do this maybe once or twice a week, so we'll see how we go. But man, that was really fun. I think that David got a lot of value out of that as well. So hope to see him at one of those events. Hope you come to one of those events too, because man, these are going to be really, really exciting. It's a fun month. We've got a lot of stuff planned. Let's do it. Thanks, guys.